John Fredericks Radio Network. Joining me now is J-Ron Smith. He is Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of the Office of American Innovation, and he is with us now from the White House. Hey, J-Ron, thanks for being with us, man.
Thanks for having me, John. How are you?
Never better on this Thursday. Looking forward to the weekend coming up. I want you to shed insight here, J-Ron, on the President's executive order on policing, some reforms that are going down, and then we can talk about the legislation that Mitch McConnell says he's going to move forward. I want to get your thoughts on that. But, J-Ron, let's start with the President's EO.
Sure. So the president showed some leadership this week by signing an executive order on Tuesday that would create a co-responder program with the joint effort of DOJ and HHS. The co-responder program would assist police departments by allowing them to have a social worker join them on the beat for cases involving those with mental health, individuals who are on drugs or drug addicted or under some substance abuse, or even individuals who are homeless. So many of our law enforcement are overwhelmed with these type of cases, and it may be proper use to have social workers intervene to de-escalate situations. We also are pushing our police departments and encouraging them to be accredited. These accreditation bodies create standards, high standards on the use of force, as well as training on de-escalation and creating better police and community relations. It's an opportunity to really maybe triple the size of those police departments that are accredited. There are almost over 1,000 accredited police departments, and what we found is those police departments that don't have this accreditation are more likely to have higher violence and also have fractured trust and relationships with the communities that they served. And then the last thing is we've learned from the police departments that no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop, and so they asked us to work on a database to collect those bad cops who've had really broken records so that they can understand, if they can know when a bad cop's leaving one jurisdiction and is trying to hop around to another, they can have some infrastructure around knowing who are good cops to hire and who are bad cops to hire. And so those are some of the highlights, and we also are focusing on asking Congress to, fund training as well as ways to retain and recruit police officers. No better way to get a better police department and create better relationships with the community than recruit people from the community to be police officers. And so a lot of good stuff in that executive order, very historic in nature, and the president was able to work with the police departments. Many of the law enforcement agencies support the executive order, but we also worked with some families who have lost some loved ones over the past couple of years because of some of these fractured relationships.
So, J-Ron, how does the president's executive order dovetail into police reform legislation that Mitch McConnell is bringing forward over the next several days in the U.S. Senate?
Well, what we were able to do was show Congress a way that we can move forward, and the way to do that is not defunding the police or beating up on all the police departments and painting them with a broad brush for some of the negligence from bad police officers. And we did that by working directly with law enforcement. But we also brought families and some of the community groups in to help us create this executive order. And I think that's a great model for how legislation can actually pass. Now, hopefully in the Senate, the Democrats don't play politics with a substantive bill that Senator Scott's working on and allow for floor time to get on that bill and have this debate on what's the proper way to bring our country together, create more trust between the police and community, and help create the highest standards for our police departments.
See, I mean, that is real legislation that can have a real impact that goes beyond tearing down statues and jumping up and down and creating chaz and all this other nonsense. I mean, that is real reform, right, J-Ron?
Yeah, it's definitely real reform, and that's what it's really all about. What are the issues we're trying to solve, and that's what the president is focused on. He has a holistic strategy and vision for reforming underserved communities, which includes police reform, of course, but other things such as access to capital, or creating more school choice, or investing in minority-serving institutions that have the wherewithal to deal with health disparities in these communities. I think these holistic ways are the ways to get everyone access to the American dream.
J-Ron, it's going to get forwarded by Mitch McConnell. This is basically the Tim Scott bill. I know you guys have talked to Democratic Senate leadership, Chuck Schumer, others. Are they going to go forward? Are they going to try to stop it? What are they going to do?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think that we would, of course, encourage an open process. It'd be really sad to use the type of methods that we've heard of this week, calling Senator Scott's bill a token bill is certainly not the right dialogue to get consensus. And if you're able to do it, I would recommend that you check out the speech that Senator Scott did on the Senate floor yesterday. Very powerful speech. Hopefully it's moving enough to get the Senate Democrats to work with the Republicans on common sense reform to get it over the finish line.
If it passes the Senate, it's got to go to the House. What'll happen there, you think?
Well, if it passes the Senate, for sure, what we've seen is that anything that comes out of the Senate has to have some bipartisan support. And so it'd be a pretty strong vehicle. And I think you already saw how things are moving in the House. The bill passed the Judiciary Committee on a party line vote. And so what that is telling us is that it's likely to be party line on the floor, and that's no way it's going to move in the Senate. But I think if we have something bipartisan come out the Senate to the House, it's going to be really hard for the House to push back on not allowing for that piece of legislation to see the light of day.
John Fredericks Radio Network, we are with J-Ron Smith. J-Ron is a senior advisor in the White House to the president, deputy assistant, and also head of the innovation department there. J-Ron, I want to get to the general sense here of the president's relationship with the black community. I know that you're very much in tune to this. You talk to the president every day. I had the same question earlier for another one of our guests. Before COVID-19, before any of this happened, before George Floyd, a lot of us thought the president was going to get about 15% of the African-American vote in 2020. Now, obviously, there's a lot going on. Some of that has changed. But those of us that know Donald Trump for a long time, he has always brought African-Americans into his company. They've held senior positions in it. There's never been an issue there. What is the general sense now of the president's relationship with the African-American community as a whole?
So, look, black community, of course, is not a monolith. And I think that what we're seeing is that you have a president that's not just going to talk about what he's going to do, but he's going to perform and actually take action. And so over the past 3.5 years, we've done things that haven't been done in quite some time that specifically speaks to the disparities that exist in the African-American community, such as creating opportunity zones, to which 30% of opportunity zones are in the low-income African-American communities, or passing the First Step Act, which has released about 13,000 nonviolent offenders and allowed for them to get a fresh start on life. A huge percentage of that 13,000 are African-American, so you have more African-American fathers and mothers returning home to their families. And then lastly, and certainly not least, historic investment in in historically black colleges. Those historically black colleges have permanent funding, something that they've never had over the last next 10 years. And they also are continuing to be the epic center for opportunity for many communities through our ability to give them a bigger platform. And so almost everyone in the country is talking about the value of historically black colleges and universities. And I think people are paying attention to that, paying attention to the fact that the president was able to act relatively fast when it relates to these cases related to the black community and police. For example, with George Floyd, days after the murder had happened, the president had DOJ investigating that murder. Or if you're looking at the Ahmaud Arbery case, same thing. We got involved as much as we could early on, and then more importantly, that culminates in his decisive action with this executive order, which not only included the police, but included the families, and we just had the families here, and they were able to share their grief, and had a very emotional meeting with the president on Tuesday, and we were able to kind of make a commitment to help them get justice. So all of these things are positive, and I think is going to really speak volumes to a community that has been neglected by the left for far too long.
I'm going to talk about that. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. I got a couple more minutes. We're live with Jaron Smith. He's at the White House. He's the Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy Director of the Office of American Innovation, which I'm very interested in. So you talk about making investments into minority communities and those that are underserved. And that's been one of the big issues that people are saying, hey, we're going to take some money from cops and put that back into underserved communities. But everybody kind of understands opportunity zones, right, to a certain extent. Lower taxes, go and start a business there. What are some of the other tangible things when you talk about underserved communities of color? What are other tangible things that can be done that would be uplifting to those, J-Rob?
So I mentioned a little bit about access to capital. One plan that we're looking at, and the president announced this in Dallas, is making the Minority Business Development Agency, an agency that was created by another Republican president, Richard Nixon, through an executive order, a statutory agency. We would, of course, update the work of that agency by allowing for it to also work with other components of the federal government, including the CDFI fund, which is out of Treasury, as well as the Small Business Administration and their work through the SBIC, which is the Small Business Investment Companies. We think we can put together a strategy that can create new access to capital and couple that with the technical assistance or the financial coaching that can allow businesses to not only thrive but to grow in unique ways. And we think that could be a huge catalyst with creating jobs and closing the economic mobility gap in the black community. And so that's something we'll continue to work with Congress on this summer. But another way is also looking at the healthcare disparity. After the COVID pandemic, spotlight was really shined on how communities of color are being impacted by COVID. Historic disparities exist from things like hypertension and diabetes, and there's a number of African American institutions that specialize in these type of diseases in public health. Meharry Medical College, Drew College, as well as Howard and Morehouse have specific backgrounds in figuring out how to best deal with that disparity and allow for people to live healthier lives. And so we're looking at ways that we can invest in those institutions and scale more of that work around the country with existing funding that normally doesn't get to hit these institutions and usually goes to some of the bigger colleges such as Harvard and MIT. And so a lot of work to be done, and we're looking to show leadership and take action.
Jaron, I've got to tell you, you've been on with me here about 20 minutes, right? In 20 minutes, you have given more specifics of real life-changing legislation and policies, real stuff that really works, than I've heard from the other side in 4 months, right? In 20 minutes, from real police reform to real programs to help underserved communities, including the capitalization of African-American owned, minority-owned businesses, to COVID-19, to healthcare. In 20 minutes, you've listed out probably 8 real things that can improve people's lives, not protests, not throw not throw Molotov cocktails, not loot, not burn down a Target. Real things, including more investment into HBCU colleges, which, as everybody knows, I'm a major fan of. Why can't we get this message out?
Well, I mean, we're trying.
Am I making sense at all? I mean,
you're making perfect sense.
20 minutes.
I mean,
I have heard the left on the other side for weeks and weeks and weeks, hours and hours a day, jumping up and down, waving their arms, setting up chaz, doing whatever they do. And there's not a single substantive policy that has come out of any of it, other than perhaps a couple of indictments, right? That perhaps. But you've outlined like 10 things that, if implemented, will improve lives. How do we get this out?
Well, going on radio shows like this certainly help, and we, of course, have spent some time on the road, and I think that'll pick back up since the country is starting to reopen. But that you have to go straight to the people, and the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council has been to over 60 cities and has had over 100 different convenings, and that's really what it's about, actually getting on the ground with the people. But you know, all of these things are localized, and so what we're very careful to do is not be so prescriptive from the federal government, but allow for these local ecosystems to leverage the tools we have and localize them to have local solutions to local problems. But we don't do that in a vacuum. It's about partnering with the private sector, partnering with local leaders and nonprofits, and creating a strategy to get things done.
Well, one of the most impactful things you've said is giving African American owned businesses and potential businesses access to capital, because you can have all the community, all the enterprise zones, you know, the Jack Kemp enterprise zones you want, but you have to have capital. I mean, in order to pay taxes, you have to make money. So you can come in and say, we're doing an enterprise zone, you don't pay any money. That's big companies coming in from the outside. That's fine. They create jobs. But entrepreneurism, you need access to capital. And that's one of the staples of what you're doing. And sometimes starting out, if you're an underserved community, that's very difficult to do. The traditional bank is not going to give you the money to either start your business or grow your business. And the businesses fail because they're undercapitalized. I went through one myself, as everyone knows, some time back. So these are all the things you guys are doing. I've got to get you on my show, J-Ron, in a consistent basis. Hey, fabulous segment and fabulous work. Keep it up.
Thank you. And thanks for having me, and I look forward to joining you again.